My drill press is still in the storage unit on Route 9. I know because I'm the one paying for that storage unit. I've been paying for it for 4 years now, and sometimes I drive past the place just to remind myself it exists, that I didn't imagine the 32 years I spent building something with my own hands. I'm 63 years old. My name is Roger Callahan. I grew up in Decatur, Illinois, and I have been an electrician since I was 19 years old. Not the kind who shows up in a van with a logo on the side and hands you an invoice for $800 to replace a breaker. The kind who built the thing from the ground up. My brother-in-law and I started Callahan & Doss Electrical in 1991 out of the back of a Ford Ranger with 2 toolboxes and 1 commercial account. A machine shop on the east side of town that needed its panel rewired. We did the job in 2 days. The owner paid us cash, shook our hands, and said he'd call us back. He called us back for the next 22 years. That's how you build something. 1 handshake at a time. 1 job done right, and on time, and then another, and then another. By 2010, we had 11 employees, a proper office, 3 vans, and a reputation in 3 counties. My wife handled the books. My brother-in-law ran field operations. I did the estimating and the client relationships. It wasn't glamorous. I came home most nights with grease on my knuckles and numbers in my head, and I fell asleep on the couch more times than I can count. But it was mine. It was ours. My wife and I had been married for 27 years by then. We met at a church social in 1983. She was there with her sister, and I was there because my mother made me go. She had a laugh that carried across the whole fellowship hall, and I thought, whoever that is, I need to know her name. I found out. I married her 3 years later. We had a good life, not perfect. Nobody's is. We lost a baby in 1989. We went through a stretch in the late 90s when money was tight and we barely spoke without arguing. But we made it through. You do if you want to. You put your head down and you make it through. What I didn't account for was her brother. He'd been around the business almost from the beginning, doing odd jobs, helping with deliveries, answering phones for a stretch in the 90s when we needed the help. He's 10 years younger than me, easygoing in the way that people are when they haven't had to work very hard for anything. My wife adored him. That was always fine with me. She didn't have many family left by the time we were married, and I understood what he meant to her. I never had a problem with him personally. The problem came later. It came slowly, the way most problems do. So slowly that by the time you see it clearly, it's already too late. In 2018, my brother-in-law had a health scare. Nothing life-threatening, as it turned out, but enough to make him want to step back from field operations. We restructured. My wife suggested we bring her brother in more formally, give him a real role, a salary, a title. I wasn't against it. He'd been reliable enough over the years, and I figured having family involved would mean one less thing to worry about. I gave him the title of Operations Coordinator. I gave him access to the vendor accounts, the scheduling software, the email system. I gave him a key to the office. I should have trusted the feeling I got the first time he sat down at the desk that used to be mine. He smiled up at me and said, "I think I'm going to like it here." Something went cold in my chest. I chalked it up to tiredness. By 2019, he was coming to dinner twice a week. He and my wife would sit at the kitchen table after I'd gone to the den, talking in low voices. When I'd walk back in for a glass of water, they'd stop. Not dramatically. Just pause. Rearrange. Look at me like I'd interrupted something. I asked her about it once. She said they were talking about the business, that I wouldn't want to be bothered with it after a long day. I said I'm always happy to talk about the business. She said that wasn't what she meant. I still don't know exactly what she meant by that. I've had 4 years to think about it, and I still don't know. The first real sign came in March of 2020. Everything was shutting down. COVID, the whole country going sideways, and we were trying to figure out how to keep our crews working, how to handle the PPP loans, how to talk to our commercial clients who were themselves in freefall. It was the most stressful period in the company's 30-year history. I was on the phone 18 hours a day. One evening, I sat down at my home computer to pull up the bank portal, the way I'd done 1,000 times. My password didn't work. I figured I'd mistyped it. I tried again. Locked out. I called the bank the next morning, and they told me the authorized signatories on the account had been updated 2 weeks prior. My wife's name was there. My brother-in-law's name was there. Mine wasn't. I stood in the kitchen and I read that back to myself 3 times. I thought I'd misheard the woman on the phone. I asked her to repeat it. She repeated it. She was sorry, but there was nothing she could do. The change had been processed with proper documentation and her supervisor's approval. I hung up and stood there for a long time. When my wife came downstairs, I showed her what I'd written on the notepad by the phone. The bank. The account. My name removed. She sat down at the kitchen table and said, "We've been talking about this." I said, "Talking about what?" She said my brother-in-law thought it would be cleaner, going forward, to have a tighter circle of control on the financial side, less exposure. That made sense, didn't it, given everything that was happening? I said, "I started that company?" She said she knew that. She said she knew and that nobody was disputing it, and that this was just an administrative thing. I said some things after that. I'm not proud of all of them. My voice got loud in a way. It hadn't in years. She sat very still and waited for me to finish, and when I did, she said, quietly, "This is exactly why we needed to do it this way." I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I called a lawyer the morning after that. Not a divorce lawyer. I wasn't there yet, as foolish as that sounds now. A business attorney. I laid out the situation and she listened, and then she said, very carefully, that unless my name was on the operating agreement with specified veto rights, there might be less protection than I assumed. I said my name was on the operating agreement. She asked me when I'd last looked at it. I drove to the office that afternoon and pulled the filing cabinet. The operating agreement had been amended in January of 2019. There were 3 signatures on the amendment. Mine wasn't one of them. I sat in that office for 2 hours. The office I'd rented since 2004. The office with the scratch on the doorframe where we'd measured the kids' heights for years before we got too old for that. The filing cabinet I'd bought used from an office liquidator in Bloomington for $40. I photographed every document I could find before I left that day. I sent the photos to my attorney before I reached my car. That much at least I did right. The next 3 months were the worst of my life. My wife and I were still living in the same house, but we had become strangers to each other. Her brother was effectively running the company now, my company, and sending me occasional update emails that were courteous and completely hollow. My attorney was working through the legal angle, but said it would take time. Cases like this, she said, were complicated. I want to be honest here, because the honest version is harder than the version where I did everything right. The honest version is that I made some bad decisions in those months too. I withdrew further. I stopped pushing as hard as I should have. I was 60 years old, and I was tired, and I was ashamed. Ashamed in a way I hadn't expected, and that shame made me slow when I should have been moving fast. But I did one thing right, and it turned out to matter. I kept records. Every email, every phone call I could document, every vendor who'd worked with us for years and would talk to me man to man. I kept records of the records they tried to bury. My attorney told me later that it was the clearest picture of business fraud she'd seen in 20 years of practice. In the fall of 2020, I moved out of the house, not because I was asked, because I could not stay in that place another night and keep anything left of myself. I rented a room from an old colleague in Springfield, just a room with a shared kitchen and a bathroom down the hall, the kind of arrangement I hadn't known since I was 22 years old. I was 60 years old, sleeping in a room with a twin bed and a window that looked out on a parking lot. The first week I didn't leave that room much. I sat on the edge of the bed and I looked at the wall and I thought about 32 years. I thought about the machine shop on the east side of Decatur. I thought about the handshake. Then I got up. I'm not going to make it sound like some sudden transformation. It wasn't. It was slow, and it was ugly, and there were weeks I didn't believe it was going to amount to anything. But I got up. I made calls. I had my attorney file the fraud suit in November of 2020. I reached out to former employees who'd been let go, quietly, carefully, with my attorney's guidance. I reached out to two of our largest former clients who'd known me personally for over a decade. In January of 2021, I registered a new LLC, RJC Electrical Services, just me at first, and one other man. A master electrician named Gary who'd worked for me for 11 years and left Callahan and Doss 6 months after my brother-in-law took over. Gary said he'd been waiting to hear from me. That mattered more than I can say. We started small, residential at first, then light commercial. I was back in the field for the first time in years, actually holding wire, pulling permits, standing on ladders. My back wasn't happy about it. My hands remembered what to do. Word got around the way it always does in a place like Central Illinois. People who'd known me for 30 years, who'd known my work, came around. Not all at once. A call here. A referral there. A commercial property manager who said he'd been meaning to reach out because the new outfit at Callahan and Doss had missed 3 deadlines in a row, and he needed someone he could count on. I gave him someone he could count on. The fraud case settled in the spring of 2022. My attorney said we could have gotten more if we'd gone to trial, and maybe she was right. But I was done spending my energy on that part of my life. I took what was fair. I put it back into RJC. The divorce was finalized that same spring. 36 years. I'm not going to try to summarize that in a paragraph. What I'll say is that on the day the paperwork came through, I drove to the storage unit on Route 9 and I stood in front of my drill press for a while. I didn't take it out. I just stood there with the door open and looked at it. Then I drove to Gary's place and we had a beer on his back porch and talked about what commercial accounts we were going to go after in the third quarter. That was the right thing to do with that afternoon. By early 2023, RJC Electrical had 8 employees. We picked up a school district contract in Logan County that represented more annual revenue than Callahan and Doss had generated in its first 5 years. A regional property management company out of Peoria had us on preferred vendor status. Gary had hired on a second crew chief, and I was back to doing estimates and client work, which is where I belonged. I'm not a man who talks about himself much. I'm telling you all this because it matters to what happened next. In October of 2023, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. It was my wife. I hadn't spoken to her since the day the divorce was finalized. Not out of anger, or not only out of anger, just because there was nothing left to say, and every time I thought about picking up the phone, I thought about the kitchen table. The low voices. This is exactly why we needed to do it this way. Her voice was different, smaller somehow. She said she'd seen the RJC website, said a friend of hers had mentioned seeing our vans around town. She'd looked it up. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I didn't know you'd done all this." I said I'd been busy. She said that her brother had run the company into serious financial difficulty, that there were creditors, that the PPP loan money had not gone where it was supposed to go, that the fraud case I'd filed had apparently triggered an audit she hadn't known about. I said I was sorry to hear that. She said, "Roger." I said, "Yes." She said, "I think we made a mistake." I held the phone and looked out the window of my office. My office? The one with my name on the door, the one I'd leased in a small commercial park outside Springfield, the one with a coffee maker and a whiteboard and a photo of Gary and me at the Logan County School District signing. I thought about the bank. The password that didn't work. The operating agreement with 3 signatures and none of them mine. I thought about the twin bed in the parking lot window. I thought about the drill press on Route 9. I said, "I appreciate you calling." She waited, the way she always had. I said, "I hope things get easier for you." And I meant it. I truly did. Whatever else she was to me, she was 36 years of my life, and I didn't wish her harm. But that's different from wishing her back. That's a different thing entirely. She said goodbye. I said goodbye. I sat for a while after I hung up. Then I pulled up the spreadsheet for the Logan County contract and got back to work. I still have the drill press. I'll pick it up eventually, when the storage unit makes more sense to clear out than to keep. I'll set it up in the new workshop I'm building behind my house. The house I bought last year. A brick ranch outside Chatham. 3 bedrooms and a half-acre and a garage, big enough for everything I need. My back still bothers me in cold weather. Gary's wife makes a roast on Sunday nights, and sometimes I go over and we sit at their kitchen table and talk about nothing important, and it's the most comfortable I feel all week. At 63, I know something I didn't fully know at 60. You can rebuild almost anything, if you're willing to start small and do the work right. The clients worth keeping will find their way back to you. The ones who won't aren't worth keeping. And the handshake, the first one, the one that matters. That one you carry with you. Nobody can take that out of the filing cabinet. Nobody can put their name on it. It's yours.